Shani, thank you very much for joining me on this podcast.
My pleasure.
This podcast is about exploring how we can communicate better in a business environment.
Sure.
Before we start, Shani, I know you as the Chief Executive Officer of Emergent. I know you come from a maritime engineering background. But perhaps for those who don't know you, you can share a little bit about your journey, who you are, and what Emergent does.
Okay. So my background is in IT and engineering. So the whole journey, just to summarize it, compress it as much as we can, my journey starts as an entrepreneur back in 2007. So at the time I met with two other partners and we decided to go into the shipping world in Mauritius. Turns out that when we entered the market, there was at least maybe 12 competitors on the market. And I'm talking here mostly about the shipping agency business. So we started back in 2007. I had this tech background. So this was a new contribution to the sector that most of the people owning this business didn't have at the time. So I coupled everything. I had some good marketing knowledge, so I coupled everything together. And it turns out that we started 2007, and by 2010, we had taken the lead in the market.
Right.
This was crazy, to take the lead in front of 12 competitors. Some of them had been here for 70 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So we took the lead, and as far as I know, we maintained the lead thereafter. The business grew, so not only to become the number one in its field, and we expanded to South Africa and to Sri Lanka. So the head office was Mauritius. The whole idea of setting up this business was from Mauritius. So it's a 100% Mauritian business. So that was 2007. Fast forward to 2018, I decided to set up Emergent, which was an idea of a mix of technology, robotics in the maritime field. So that was brewing since 2018. I set it up. Of course, a business takes some time to mature up. And come to 2024, where I felt like the first business I had set up had reached its peak value and wasn't having any much more of a challenge for me. So that was last year. I sold off all my shares from the business. I cashed in, and I took the bet of taking all this fund and investing now in this venture, which is Emergent.
Shani, one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the podcast is because I find your story and your journey fascinating and very inspirational. And the theme of this episode is about how to establish credibility early on, whether as a young professional or a young business or a young product on the market. And before we get into that, perhaps you can tell us a bit more about what Emergent does in terms of what products it supplies and on what market.
Yeah. I would say overall we are in maritime robotics. So that encompasses quite a few services, from anything underwater services, which is about hull maintenance. And so we develop our own, as I say, robots and drones. So in a sense, that's it. And from there, we offer services. We don't sell the products. So we offer services in Mauritius and in other places as well. And that's overall what we do.
You said you started in the business in 2007.
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask how old you were then?
27.
27.
Yes.
So that's relatively young to be starting in a business.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to this, and I'll tell you why I asked. The format of these episodes is very much a conversation about story from the courtroom, from my courtroom experience, and then I'll pick your brains on what you think, how you would have dealt with it in business.
Please do.
And the story that I wanted to share happened not very long ago, and I've got more than a decade in practice now in Mauritius. But you're always before a judge or magistrate who doesn't know you, either because they are new to the bench, or because you've just not done the type of cases that makes you be in front of them very often. I was appearing for the claimant in court, and the magistrate called the birth council in chambers to see if we can discuss and explore a settlement between the parties, which is always a good initiative from the bench. And we always say that a bad settlement is better than a good day in court, because you never know what happens in court. So as we went in, I realized that the magistrate had a huge load of cases to get through, and she may not have looked at every file. And then she asked me, so Mr. Nursimulu, can you tell me briefly what your claim is about? And I started explaining. And then she said, well, you're not going to get this because your claim is wrong in law. And in that moment, perhaps I should add that the clients on both sides were also in the chambers. So they could, of course, see what the magistrate thinks about the case. And of course, it affects negotiations. When one party knows that they've got a stronger position with this person who potentially might be determining the outcome of the case. So I thought, like, I'm going to stay composed. And I know that the magistrate didn't read the file in and out and doesn't know every detail of it. But I'm fairly confident in the claim that I made. So I just said, bearing in mind that we're not here to discuss the issues in the case, but to discuss a settlement, I just calmly said, if I may just beg to differ. But and then I drew the conversation back to, or I was about to draw the conversation back to the negotiation. Fortunately, the magistrate didn't take it very well that I said, may I beg to differ? And she then, I could see that her reaction changed. And she asked me, who are you? I felt when she said that, it was said in a way of saying, who are you to tell me that you disagree with me? It's not necessarily what she meant, but that's how I felt. And I say that it's not necessarily how she felt because I have a very good relationship with that magistrate now, because we cleared the air after that. We had a chat about it, and I know, well, she did explain that that's not how she wanted it to come across. But at that moment, that's how I felt. I felt undermined in front of my client and in front of the opposing side. I felt undermined because not only did she ask, who are you, in a tone to question whether I'm in a position where I can challenge her, but also she followed that up with a statement that made me really feel undermined. And that was, she told me, I think before you tell me that you beg to differ, you should go and see a senior and check your position with the senior, because then you will know that you are wrong. And in that moment, of course, there's some sort of power dynamics in the room, because I am in front of someone in a more senior position than me. I can't straight up say, no, I'm not going to do that. And there's a level of respect, and you don't want to dismiss what the other person has said. But at the same time, I have a duty towards my client to represent their interests. And I also have a duty to make sure that the claim is well represented and that it's not being undermined. It's not just me as a person being undermined, but also that the case is not undermined. I'll come back to what I did a bit later in our conversation. But I wanted to ask you, how often does it happen in business where before you even explore a product or you pitch an idea or an investment or whatever decision, that you're judged not because of that idea, but because of your age, where you're from, the fact that you're from a small country. How does that resonate in the business world?
Yes, sometimes it does. But with time, I would say less and less with time.
Yeah, because you establish your credibility with time.
Yes, exactly. So I feel that having spent nearly 20 years in the shipping business, so I started relatively early. So by the time that you've spent 20 years, you've established your brand is established, your reputation. But in the early days, yes. I'll tell you a story that happened in my very early days. I just finished my first degree. I went in the consultancy world. Let's go there, because just hopping onto this idea, like how people can belittle you. Okay. And my experience, what I had back then compared to yours, is like, let me get to the story. I'll try to communicate the feeling as well. So, just came out of university. I'm 23 years old, starting out in business. So I integrate the consultancy world, and my boss at the time gives me a very little coaching. It was 1 hour coaching at the office. Brings me to that. We just obtained a big contract with a big corporation in Mauritius, one of the biggest. So I'm there, and basically you ask him, what's the job? He coached you for 1 hour. How much coaching can you get in an hour? But then you're relatively young and stupid. That was my case. Where you feel like, you've done some complicated subjects at school, so you should be able to do everything. I remember me going into that boardroom, and it was supposed to be a series of identical meetings because you were briefing the client. Maybe I'm sure you've been through those it's kind of a training, right? Yeah. It was at management level. So my boss did the first meeting, and I listened intently to what he was saying. Right there from the start in the first session, in my mind, I was going like, dude, this is simple, right? But again, at this level, at this age, you lack maturity. And you cannot understand what maturity is. You'll argue with people who tell you that you lack the maturity, which is not your case at all. I am talking about my case at the time. So you don't understand maturity, and you don't have a clue what it is, but yet you're sure that you have it. The first hour, my boss delivers that speech, and again, it goes like brilliant. Everybody's clapping. He's so good at it. Second session, excellent. Third session, I'm telling you, I'm getting bored. Like, go away now. Let me do this thing. And they go for lunch, and my boss goes, Shani, are you comfortable now? I was going, for sure, I'm comfortable. Can you take the next session? Yes, because I have another meeting I need to take. So he wouldn't even be in the room.
Right.
And so we go to lunch, 1 o'clock we're back, and we start with my first session as a junior. Yeah. I feel like saying that I'm a junior is not even the right term for this. I'm like a total newbie, a noob, but overconfident noob. I go in there and I meet with that woman. I mean, she was like 35 years old. She had an MBA. She knew the whole stuff from A to Z. And I start to say the exact same word like my boss said. And all hell breaks loose. I mean, that woman took me and ran me over. And she wouldn't let go, She wouldn't give me a break. And she ran me over like for 30 minutes. And guess what? At the time, now that I think about it, it's the word she said. It hurt you. Like, right? I still remember after 20 years, I'm talking about that today. So how she made you feel. But then you also remember the other people around who are comforting to you.
Yeah.
Like her colleague was like, we know her. She's difficult to deal with. She's got that arrogant attitude. Don't worry, you'll be doing fine. So, words at the end of the day in the business world, you need to manage feelings. You want to sell your product, people should like you. Yeah. Don't come across as an arrogant prick. This won't work. Nobody wants to buy from an arrogant prick. So be humble. So that was a story I can relate to. Yes. So to conclude, definitely your words, how you make people feel in negotiations, always go for the expertise needs to be there, right? So that was my first mistake. So I'm not really blaming that other woman. She was nasty, but I really lacked the expertise. So you need to have the expertise, sure. But then following that, you need to be kind always and have this sense of humility. Wherever you are, in authority, not in authority, selling tech or whatever. So, yeah.
That's very interesting. I think we'll have a lot to unpack from that, as I told you how I approached my courtroom story as well. But just before we jump to that, I met you a few weeks ago, and I wonder if you can share the story that you told me about. I think when you first started in business, as you said, you were about 27, and you had a conversation with a senior guy in the industry. I don't know if you remember that story.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Do you mind? Because I think that story,
No, it's a great story.
Shows how, especially because of your age, or the fact that you look young, and it's not only age, the fact that you don't have the experience that others may have. Before you even say something, they've already made an opinion.
Yes.
If you don't mind sharing that story.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm saying it's a great story because it taught me a lot. Right. It taught me a lot to always stay humble. So I just came in the business. It was 2007. And again, the expertise is not there. You're starting out. I go to one of those conferences being organized for our industry. I'm sure you got same kind of conferences, like where you meet people of all ages, the one starting out to the one who's 70 years old, who's done with their career. So I met with this guy who was in charge of a big company here locally. So I had only heard of him by name. So I was just roaming around in it was after the conference, they got those booths, right? Yeah. Where they expose their products. So this guy was walking around and looking at the booths as well. I saw him, I was like, me, the newbie guy, meeting this big guy, big corporation. Yeah, I take my chance. Just casual chit chat, at least he'll know who I am. So I went along, say, Mr. X, how are you doing? Oh, yeah, who are you? I say, I'm Mr. Y from that company. As soon as I said that company, because we were some kind of competitors, right? Indirect competitors. So it was already like you felt the turn off for him, right? Okay, fair enough. So first the turn off. Then I was like, yeah, I know you're the CEO of that company. So what do you guys do? General chit chat. Yeah. Like what kind of operations you do? And what he replied to me at the time was, we do a lot of exportation, of export, right? We do a lot of export. So, yeah, what kind of export? So we export steel via planes. A lot of them via containers, put them in containers and put them in airplanes and ship it. And
this was a well-known shipping company.
I cannot say. Okay. So, at the time, me being a newbie and having no expertise in the field, I was impressed. My first reaction was to be impressed. Export of steel via containers through airplanes. And that just stuck with me, and you go on through your thing. It's only a couple of weeks later when this just clicked in my mind. Who in their sane mind exports steel in containers which weigh tons? It doesn't make any sense. So what essentially this guy did was to quite elaborately made fun of me. So that was, at the time it just like strikes you like a bat on the head. Why he did that? You have a lot of questions. Like, I'm a new guy. Why would you do this to me? Why would you tell me such a... So I went to my colleague and explained it, and he was like, dude, this guy's a prick, eh? Turns out that we are 20 years down the line. My company beat him out, his company, long time back. I've achieved way more than he ever did in his field. Again, not trying to sound overly confident or arrogant, but it's just the pure truth. Like, we beat him way out of it. He's been through quite a few rough patches of very bad stories. And then it's just like this taught me why ever be arrogant? Yeah. What's the use of it? It's like, okay, now I'm much further than you in life and achieve way more than you at a younger age. And still what you told me 20 years back, instead of having me today as an ally, I wouldn't touch this guy with a flagpole. And guess what? 15 years down the line, he wanted to have some kind of cooperation and business deal. And I was like, no, really. Again, for people to deal with you, I agree, there's business. But there's also people should like you somewhere, right? Have some values. If tomorrow I engage myself, it makes all sense. It's not only feelings.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to relate in terms of, feeling undermined, but not everyone has the luxury that you did to say, no, I don't want to do business with that guy. Yeah. I think, in the workplace, for example, you're undermined by your boss. You can't say, I quit, or I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything for you. Yeah. And in my situation, for example, I'm undermined by the magistrate or the judge. I can't say I'm not going to come in your court ever, because that's just the end of my career. I can't, you don't have the luxury in every situation to decide I'm not going to deal, or I'm not going to pursue the conversation with the person undermining me. Yeah, we want to explore, how we handle these conversations. And there are conversations where not only you can't say I'm not dealing with that person, but you need to pursue the conversation. Like in my case with a magistrate, for example, or in a business, you've got a deal that you really want to close. And my colleagues who do transactional work, almost in every M&A case, you have 1 week where things are not, right in the balance, and something comes up, but you still need to bring the deal to a close. Yeah. In my experience, the first thing that I need to address is, what is this undermining doing to me? A big part of my job is to make sure that the bench listens effectively to me, but I need to win their trust in order to get to that point. So when that happens in a conversation where I feel that I am undermined in an important conversation, I need to think, look, the fact that they underestimate me, or the fact that they might think I'm not competent to have this conversation, it shouldn't affect my own belief in my competence. And I don't know how you would navigate this, but one thing that helps me a lot is to have people around me. I can have people I can use as a sounding board. And, I would go in my colleague's office, or I would call seniors I work with, people I consider as mentors, and say, this happened, and what do you think? Do you think I was really right to say this? Or do you think I was wrong? Do you think? And it's not that I depend entirely on what their opinion is, but I think it's good to check with with people that you have a high esteem for, whether you were in, just to check whether you were right in what you were saying, and just to kind of reinforce and reinstate your own confidence, because sometimes something happens and you're just thrown off completely by it. You don't even know for a moment what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. And it's good to have those people. I don't know if that's something that you relate.
Yes, I do. Every time you go through this kind of situation, first thing you ask yourself, is it good to ponder on it? Is it good to over ponder on it? Yes. Yeah. So why? Because your brain is finding some way to rationalize what happened. And you need to come out with the right conclusion, because this is how you build, and this is how you build confidence in any case. Yeah. So whatever happened to you a year ago, I'm mostly certain in a year or 2 years down the line, you would have sorted that thing.
You said something about when you're pitching a product, you have to think of your way of communication, and I suppose the confidence as well that comes in. And I wanted to ask you about Emergent, because at the beginning, that's why I asked you to explain a bit what solutions you sell. I'm not an expert in this industry, but I understand it's a very niche industry, and Mauritius is not known for being a country that develops maritime technologies, or let me put it this way, any cutting edge technologies. We're not a Silicon Valley. We don't have that reputation. So when you go on the international market and you sell these solutions as a company based and operating in Mauritius, has it ever occurred to you, have you ever felt like a bit of an imposter? A bit like as if, because the fact that you're from Mauritius, whether the fact that you're from Mauritius undermines your credibility?
I see what you mean by the imposter syndrome. Many people have it. I see myself as a warrior at the end of the day. Business is war every day. So no, it's like, no. I wouldn't express my inner thoughts. It wouldn't be good to hear, but I'm always at war.
But how do you keep that mindset? How do you ensure you've got that level of confidence?
I don't care.
You don't care what they think?
Yeah. I'm going in for the kill. You're either on my side or against me. So we'll fight this one out. I told you my first company, we started in 2007 and we became the biggest in 2011, maybe. We became the biggest. At the time, we were innovating at such a pace where I still remember we deployed a new service and we had a captain coming in from the US. And he said, I've been around the world, and never have encountered such a service in any country. Say, what are you guys doing here? So first thing, everyone amongst us have some kind of belief, right, about ourselves, about what we do. My belief was, I was born here for a reason, right? If I really was after purely success, I should have emigrated to the US. That's where the El Dorado of, as you say, the Silicon Valley is there and everything. But I felt somewhere in my mind, body and soul that I was born Mauritian for a reason. So I try to uphold this Mauritian vision to the best that I can. So at the end of the day, you take your product international, and if you want to judge, it's fine. But at the end of the day, is the service there, is the results there. If they are, then they are.
Yeah. I appreciate that mindset of not caring. It took me a long time to get there. Because when I started, especially in the first few years, I was constantly thinking of how I'm being perceived by the bench. And it's, to be fair, it's a reasonable, it's perfectly reasonable, because a lot depends on it, but also a lot depends on my self-confidence. And for me, the only way to build self-confidence is to care a bit less about what others think, because if your image of yourself is going to be based entirely on what other people's opinion is about you, then you will always be manipulated and driven in different directions depending on what people think. And it took me some time, and I think I'm in a good space now where it's not that I don't care, but because I know where I stand, and I know that I've got people around me I can go to as a sounding board to test whether to test my competence in whether I'm able to do certain things. Because of that, I'm not too bothered about what other people in the bigger circle might think or not. And that leads me to, so I said, going back to my courtroom story, the first thing I had to do immediately was an internal thinking of, look, I'm not going to let this get to me, the fact that I'm undermined. And secondly, it's the mindset of letting them underestimate you. In fact, I'm quite comfortable and I prefer being the dark horse in a way. You know, say that still waters run deep, and I prefer being the still waters because I would rather build credibility with time than force my way through and get someone to listen to me when they don't want to. And in that courtroom setting, we were in chambers. The fact that the magistrate said, "Who are you?" and go and see a senior, it wasn't a great starter for the conversation. It didn't set the tone of the conversation right. I did go see the senior, and I did get a response, and I did get a confirmation that I'm right. And then I went back into the chambers, and in the meantime, the magistrate had read the papers and realized that I was right in what I was saying. Maybe she didn't understand what I was saying, or I didn't say in the way that she, in a way that she understood what the case really was about. And we, as I said, we cleared that afterwards. But the reflection that I want to draw on the statements that she made is that it just didn't set the right tone for the rest of the conversation. But I had to be comfortable with the fact that we were going to have this conversation, we're going to pursue this conversation, and I know that she doesn't have a great, perhaps a great opinion of me right then, but it can't stop me from having the conversation, and I'll just have to adapt right there. Shani, it's been a great conversation with you, and we could continue this conversation much longer, but the format of the podcast is not, a 3-hour show, but I'm sure we could carry on with this. There's one last question that I ask every guest on the podcast, and it's who inspires you as a good communicator?
So one of my favorite communicators ever is Tony Robbins.
Yeah,
the guy's very good. I'm not all praise about him, but again, if someone is telling you a whole lot of things, maybe 10% of what he's saying is useful. Have you heard of his, or at least you know about the incantation that he mentions?
No,
incantations. So the word has all kind of connotation, but basically it's some kind of different mental reinforcement, which has been of extreme good use to me over the years. Is basically, you know about like positive affirmations.
I do. Yeah.
He goes beyond that. Right. He goes beyond that. And if someone thinks that, okay, we do positive affirmation, it's the same thing, not the same thing at all. He brings it to another level where if you prepare yourself in the way of Tony Robbins, you can go into a room and own the conversation.
I'll look that up, the incantation side. Shani, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking to you.